The snow came early that year, like a soft white betrayal. It drifted over the roof of the half-broken station house and settled along the tracks where the last train of the day had already hissed its goodbye. The wind whistled low through the timber and the bones of things forgotten, tugging at the hem of her faded skirt. Mara June sat still on the iron bench, her back stiff with pride and cold, her belly round beneath her wool coat, not quite hidden, not quite safe. She had come with one suitcase and half a promise. Now, only the suitcase remained. The station at Cinder Trace wasn't much, a cracked wooden platform, a bench missing one slat, a faded timetable nailed to the wall with rusted pins. No one waited here unless they had to. No one stayed unless they'd been left. Mara had been both. She'd taken the train from Abilene 3 days ago, chasing the last thread of something like love. Thomas Cray had told her there was gold in the hills, a new life for the two of them. He'd taken her hand like a vow, and then stared too long when her fingers curled protectively over her middle. 38, he'd said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, and already waddling like some farmer's wife. Then the silence. Then the shrug. Then the cold goodbye at the third stop before the mountain pass. No ring. No name on any deed. Just a woman, pregnant and out of place, told gently and firmly that she would be better off back east. But east was ashes. East had nothing for her now but long faces and longer winters. So she stayed seated, one gloved hand resting on the curve of her belly, the other gripping the suitcase handle like it might keep her anchored. A boy passed with a basket of apples, and Mara smiled at him. He didn't smile back. The townspeople here weren't cruel, not exactly, but they knew what it meant when someone was dropped off and didn't leave. Trouble or sorrow. Sometimes both. She watched as the sky bruised into twilight, the clouds heavy with more snow, and still she didn't cry. Her tears had been spent in private places, on bathroom tiles, in train car shadows, in the hush before dawn when the world hadn't yet remembered she existed. Now she simply breathed, long and steady. She had a blanket in her case, and some dried meat from a kind conductor. If no one offered shelter, she would sleep right there on the bench. Tomorrow, maybe, she'd walk down into the town and ask after sewing work. Her fingers still remembered their trade, even if the world didn't. A soft creak came from the far end of the platform. She turned slightly, but didn't stand. A man walked out from the far shadow, tall and quiet, in a long coat the color of charcoal. His hat brim was low, and a scarf wrapped his throat like he preferred stillness to speech. He moved like someone used to silence, not the silence of fear, but the kind made from years alone with weather and thought. Mara looked away. She'd had enough of men who spoke only after long silences. They usually came with plans they never meant to keep. But he stopped a few paces from her. The wind shifted. Snow flurried between them like a curtain. He didn't speak, just stood there, studying her the way a man might study the weather, measuring, not judging. "Evenin'," she said softly, not as a greeting but a courtesy. His voice came low, like gravel smoothed by rain. "You missed your train?" She didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "No. It missed me." He gave a slow nod. Not the kind that meant he understood, but the kind that meant he wouldn't ask more. Another silence stretched between them, and she felt it settle like dust. Then his boots shifted, and he stepped toward her, not fast, not looming. Just enough to be heard. "Station's got no fire. Snow's come in thicker now. You got shelter." She looked at him, finally. Not at his boots or coat or hat, but his eyes. They were the color of pine bark, deep and weather-worn, with no edges. "Don't need charity," she said. He gave a slight shrug, almost apologetic. "Didn't offer that. Just warmth and supper. Some folks would call that neighborly." Mara's fingers tightened on her suitcase. She thought of all the rooms she'd entered before, doors opened with grins and closed with disappointment. Warm food with cold intentions. Promises wrapped in praise. He didn't push, just stood there like a winter tree, still, rooted, and waiting. From inside the station house, a door creaked. The old woman who kept the place, Emma, someone had called her, stepped out into the chill. "Elias," she called, tugging her shawl tighter. You best get going. Road lice by moonrise. The man tipped his hat. Just saw someone sitting alone. Emma squinted, then looked down at Mara and softened just a little. She's had a rough day, the woman said gently. Then, to Mara, you can stay in the back room if you'd rather. It's dusty, but it's got walls. Mara hesitated. There was kindness in Emma's voice, but the kind that fades with time. And there was no fire in that back room, just a cot and stale air. She turned back to the man. He hadn't moved. What's your name? She asked, voice steady. Elias Hart. Where's your place? North Ridge. Cabin's warm. No one but me and a mule. She nodded slowly, testing the shape of the words in her mind. What do you want for it? She asked. He looked at her belly then, just once. Not with pity, not with desire, just quiet recognition, like he'd seen enough life to know when someone was fighting to keep standing. Nothing. Just figured no one ought to sleep cold when there's room enough for two by the stove. The wind howled softly past the eaves. Somewhere far off, a hawk called into the dusk. Mara stood. Her knees cracked a little, and she exhaled from the effort. She picked up her case, tested its weight, and finally nodded. All right then. They walked down the steps, side by side. Not touching, not speaking. When they reached the bottom of the hill, where his wagon waited beneath the pines, he paused. Just a moment. Just enough to let the moment feel chosen. You're mine now, he said, quiet as frost. Her breath caught, not in fear, not in confusion. In recognition. He didn't mean owned. He meant kept. She looked up at him and gave a single nod. And together, they disappeared into the deepening snow. The mule snorted as Elias adjusted the reins, its breath puffing into little clouds in the cold night air. The wagon creaked as it moved, a lumbering thing made of old timber and honest hands. Mara sat beside him, her hands tucked into the folds of her coat, the suitcase cradled between her boots like an anchor she couldn't let go of. The road ahead wound through pine trees tall as sentinels, their snow-laced branches brushing the moonlight like fingers over glass. They didn't speak, not for the first mile, not even for the second. Silence stretched like a quilt between them, not cold but weighty, the kind shared by people who understood the value of not filling every space with words. The hooves clopped, steady. The wagon rocked in rhythm. And Mara, though weary and bruised by the day, felt something she hadn't in weeks. Not fear. The cabin came into view tucked into a rise between two shoulders of land. Smoke curled from the chimney, soft and blue, and the windows glowed faint with lamplight. It was not large, not clean in the polished way some might expect, but it was whole, sturdy, and the path to its door had been cleared, not by need, but by care. Elias stepped down first, tied the mule, then offered her a hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, but not possessive. His fingers felt warm, calloused, like the bark of a tree that had weathered storms and still stood. Inside, the warmth wrapped around her like a thick wool shawl. The fire crackled in a stone hearth to the left, casting a golden hue over the room. A table sat at the center, its top nicked with years of use. Two chairs. One cot in the corner. A shelf stacked with tins and dried herbs. On a peg by the door, a rifle hung idle, untouched by fresh hands. You can take the cot, Elias said, unlacing his boots. I'll take the floor or the chair, dependin' what creaks less tonight. She looked at the bed, then at him. I can sleep on the floor. I've done worse. He gave a small shake of the head. Not tonight. A silence passed, and this time she broke it. I don't want trouble. You're not. I mean, I brought it before. Men see what they want. Some see a mouth to feed. Others see something weak to own. I'm not either. But trouble finds me anyway. Elias poured water into a tin pot, set it on the fire, and stirred the embers without answering right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, thoughtful. Some folks are like kindling, catch fire too easy. Others are the hearth itself. They hold the heat. You seem like the second kind to me. She turned her eyes away. Compliments often came with hooks, but there was no pull in his voice. Just truth or something close to it. He brought her a cup of warm broth. Simple, salty, but it filled her belly better than anything had in days. You cook? He nodded. Out of necessity. It's not fine fare, but it keeps the ribs honest. Her lip twitched, the beginning of something like a smile. It faded, but it had lived for a second. That was enough. She looked around the cabin. The walls were plain, but neat. Tools hung in order. A whittled horse stood on a shelf above the fireplace, its mane carved with surprising grace. You made that. Elias glanced over. A while ago. Used to keep my hands busy at night. Silence needs something to hold sometimes. Mara ran her hand over her belly, absently, like she was listening for a clock ticking beneath her skin. How far are we from the next town? 2 days' ride. 1 if you push the mule, but he don't take kindly to rushing. She nodded. And how far are we from the life you meant to live? He looked up, one eyebrow raised. I mean, she clarified, was this always your plan? This cabin, this quiet? Elias sat across from her, hands clasped loosely. No, I had other roads once. But roads shift. I figured quiet was better than empty. Mara looked at the fire again. I tried once. To make something whole. Had a shop back east. Sewing mostly. Curtains, linens, wedding veils sometimes. I thought if I made beautiful things, maybe life would give me something beautiful back. She didn't say the rest. Didn't need to. I imagine your hands made more peace than most soldiers ever did, he murmured. She swallowed. The heat in her eyes wasn't from a fire. You always speak like that, she asked. Like what? Like someone who's writing down his thoughts instead of saying them. A low chuckle escaped him. I grew up around silence. Learned early that words ought to earn their place. Wasted one's clutter a room faster than dust. The fire cracked again, and she let the moment breathe. I won't be a burden, she said quietly. I didn't think you would be. And I won't stay where I'm not welcome. He didn't answer that with words. He stood, walked to the shelf, pulled down a folded wool blanket, and handed it to her. Then he nodded to the cot. You get the bed. That's not a kindness. It's just right. She took the blanket. Her hands were trembling slightly, though from cold or emotion she couldn't say. I don't expect anything, Elias. And I won't give what's not asked for. That was the exchange. Nothing wrapped in pretense. No shadow of bargain. Just 2 people sitting in the same winter, trying not to vanish into it. Later, when the fire had gone to embers, and the cabin was wrapped in that deep rural silence that only snow can bring, Mara lay awake on the cot, watching the ceiling. The baby shifted inside her. A small, fluttering movement. Not pain, not yet. Just presence. She whispered to the dark, so low it wouldn't leave the room. You're still mine. From the chair across the room, Elias stirred, though his eyes stayed closed. Always, he said. She hadn't meant for him to hear. But she didn't mind that he had. Snow softened in the weeks that followed, thawing into slush where the sun dared linger longer each day. The pines outside Elias's cabin shed their heavy coats 1 needle at a time, and the land began its quiet stretch into spring. But inside, the world moved slow, measured in breaths, in chores, in the silent music of 2 people learning how not to startle one another. Mara rose early now, earlier even than Elias. She'd tie her hair back with a faded ribbon, sweep the floors with gentle strokes, and feed the chickens that pecked stubbornly around the cabin. Her belly grew, undeniable now, like a drumskin stretched with promise. It pulled her back sometimes, made her hiss softly when she moved too quickly or bent the wrong way. But she never complained. Not once. Elias noticed. Not with words, but in action. He started rising before her, chopping wood before dawn. He built a stool with a broad seat and low back, so she wouldn't have to lean so far when she sat. He boiled water at dusk for her feet and left honey in her tea, though he never took any himself. And still he never asked. Never demanded her story like a price for his care. He simply gave what he had and let her keep what was hers. One morning, she caught him mending a pair of his old boots with mismatched thread. She laughed, not loud, but real, and took them gently from his hands. You'll ruin your fingers doing it that way, she said, threading her own needle. Give it here. I'll make them whole again. He didn't argue. Just watched her work, eyes soft. "You miss your shop?" he asked after a moment. She nodded. "Not the noise, but the rhythm, yes. I like turning scraps into something useful." Elias smiled faintly. "That's a kind of alchemy, I suppose. But it doesn't work on people." She didn't mean for the words to cut, but they hung there, brittle as glass. He stirred the fire. "Maybe not. But folks aren't scraps. They bend, not break." Mara sewed in silence after that. But something in her chest loosened, just slightly, like a knot that might one day come undone. Emma visited a few days later. Brought soap, a basket of root vegetables, and news from town. Mara welcomed the distraction, though her eyes flicked to Elias more often than she realized, as if needing an anchor when others entered the space. Emma took her hand at the door. "You look better, child." Mara offered a smile, the polite kind. "It's the firelight." "No," Emma said. "It's something steadier than that." After the woman left, Mara stood by the window, watching her cart disappear down the ridge. She wrapped her arms around her stomach. "You planning on staying?" Elias asked, his voice quiet. She didn't turn around. "I haven't thought that far." "That's fair. But I don't feel waiting anymore. Like I did. As if I were only borrowing time." He nodded. "Then it's yours now. Take all you need." And she did. Over the following days, Mara stitched curtains from scraps she found in the trunk under his bed, dusted the shelves, and found space for her things beside his. He watched with a kind of reverence, not for what she did, but for how she did it. With intention. With grace. One evening, they shelled peas on the porch. The sun dipped low behind the hills, bleeding orange through the trees. "I keep waiting," she said suddenly, "for the cost." Elias looked at her. "Cost? For all this? The quiet? The safety? It always comes due." He shook his head. "There's no ledger here, Mara. You breathe. You rest. That's enough." She opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had ever said she was enough simply by being. The baby kicked, and she winced, pressing a hand to her side. "You all right?" he asked, halfway to rising. She nodded, smiling through it. "She's strong. Like she's reaching for something." "Probably you." They didn't speak after that. The sky turned indigo, and the wind whispered through the trees like an oldham. The next day brought a chill wind and a noise neither had expected. Hooves. Too many for one mule. Too fast for a neighbor's visit. Elias stood from the woodpile, his axe still in hand, and stared toward the rise beyond the clearing. Dust kicked up in the distance. Mara stepped onto the porch, one hand instinctively across her belly. Then he appeared. Thomas Cray, dismounting with practiced grace, all charm and calculation, his hair slicked back, his coat cleaner than any man's should be in mud season. Behind him, two others lingered, not hired men, but the kind who followed strength without asking why. Mara's breath hitched. Not from fear, from memory. He smiled at her, the same smile he wore when he first called her sweetheart, the same one he used when he left her at the station without looking back. "Darlin'," he said, stepping forward, hat in hand. Elias didn't move. The axe remained lowered, but his eyes sharpened. "I heard you'd made a little detour," Thomas went on. "Took me a while to catch up." Mara said nothing. Not yet. She stared at him like he was a painting she'd once loved, and now saw clearly, smudged, unworthy of its frame. Thomas turned to Elias. "You the one keeping her?" Elias's voice was even. "She's not a horse to keep." "Well," Thomas said, chuckling. "Either way, I've come to bring her home." Mara stepped down from the porch, slowly. Her spine was straight, her eyes steady. "I was never your home, Thomas." He blinked, smile slipping. "Come now. You and me, we made plans." "You made plans," she said. "Then you left. Said I wasn't young enough. Pretty enough. Not worth the trouble." He glanced at Elias. "And this is better?" Mara reached for the railing as the baby stirred again. "Yes," she said, "because this isn't about better. This is about peace. I was never yours, and I never will be again." Thomas stepped forward, jaw tightening. "You deny me what's mine." Before she could answer, Elias moved between them. No threat, just presence. She's not yours to deny, he said. Thomas looked past him, sneering. She's just a woman with a child and no name. Elias's voice dropped low. And I'm a man with nothing to lose. The men behind Thomas shifted uneasily. Silence fell, cold and long. Thomas looked from Elias to Mara and back again. Then he laughed, forced and hollow. Keep her, then. But don't say I didn't come back. You never did, Mara said. You just circled back to see if the door was still open. She watched him mount his horse and disappear over the hill, smaller with each stride, like a bad dream finally leaving. Elias turned to her, not with concern, but with the gentleness he always carried. You all right? I am, she said, and meant it. He nodded once, picked up the axe, returned to splitting wood. Mara stood on the porch a moment longer, one hand pressed to her belly, the other resting lightly on her heart. This time, the silence between them was something new. It wasn't what they feared. It was what they'd found. The days that followed were carved out of quiet, not the kind that comes from absence, but the kind two people build together. There was a rhythm now to the mornings. Elias brought in the wood. Mara stoked the fire. The kettle sang. The chickens fussed. Wind moved through the eaves like a lullaby, and stillness became something sacred, not heavy. Yet the echo of Thomas's visit lingered like smoke after the fire's gone out. Mara didn't speak of it. She didn't need to. Some things clung to the skin long after they'd left the room. Elias didn't press. He just stayed nearby. Enough to be present, never enough to crowd. She found herself watching him more. The way he poured water, steady and precise. The way he waited before speaking, as if weighing not just what to say, but what she needed. He didn't flatter. He didn't make promises. But he did what most men failed to do. He saw her without reaching for her. One evening, she found him outside, mending a fence post knocked loose by wind or deer or time. His sleeves were rolled, and the muscles in his forearms tensed with every hammer fall. The sun dipped low behind him, staining the sky in amber. She stood there watching him for a while before speaking. You ever think of leaving this place? He paused, leaning on the hammer. I used to, he said. Thought the world had more to offer. But the world doesn't offer much unless you know what to ask for. And now, I ask for less, but I mean it more. She nodded slowly, stepping closer. I used to dream of the city, all those windows glowing like stars. I thought it'd make me feel bigger, like I mattered. Did it? She shook her head. It swallowed me whole. All my little stitches and careful plans, they got lost in all that noise. Elias looked at her then, really looked. You matter here. The words landed soft but firm, like snowfall settling on bare ground. She didn't reply, but she didn't look away. That night, Mara sat by the hearth, working her needle through a piece of linen she'd cut from an old shirt. She was making something small, a bonnet, maybe, or the start of a dress. The baby kicked now with more insistence, like she wanted to be part of the world already. Elias sat nearby, reading a weathered book with a cracked spine. Occasionally, he'd glance up, not at her belly, at her face. You scared? He asked. She was quiet a long time before answering. Yes, she said finally, but not of the pain, or the birth. I'm scared I'll have to run again. That peace is just a season, not a home. He closed the book. I've lived enough winters to know spring always comes slow. But when it does, it stays longer if you don't rush it. She smiled faintly. You speak like a preacher sometimes. No, he said, stretching his legs. Just a man who's learned from things that didn't bloom. Outside, the wind picked up. Trees swayed. And then a sound. Distant, but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. One. Fast. Urgent. Elias was on his feet before she could speak. He grabbed the rifle from the wall, checked the chamber, and moved to the door with careful steps. Mara followed, slower, her hand pressed to her side. A rider crested the ridge, snow and mud flying from the hooves. It was Emma's boy, red-faced and wild-eyed, his cap crooked and scarf trailing. Trouble in town, he called out, breathless. Big kind. Thomas came back. Not alone. Elias's jaw tightened. How many? 4. Maybe 5. They say he's drinking, looking for the woman, talking about debt, talking about property. Mara's blood went cold. Elias turned to her, quiet but sharp. Pack a satchel. Only what you need, just in case. She nodded and moved without protest. But her hands trembled when they reached for her shawl. He turned to Emma's boy. You head back. Say you warned us. Then get off the road. Yes, sir. As the boy rode off, Elias stepped back inside. Mara was ready, a small bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes wide but not panicked. I won't run again, she said, voice low. But I won't let him take her. He won't, Elias replied. Not while I'm standing. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls more like shields than shelter. Elias moved through the space with precision, loading, checking, counting matches and lantern oil, making sure there was water drawn. Mara watched him work, a strange calm rising in her chest. He was not a man of rage. He was not a man of noise. But he was the kind of man you trusted to hold the door when the wolves came. She stood by the hearth, her hands clutching the curve of her stomach. If anything happens. He stopped her with a look. Not stern, just certain. Nothing will happen. A knock came. Not at the door, but in the distance. A shout. Bootsteps. The sound of careless men approaching a careful life. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Thomas stood at the edge of the clearing, flanked by two others, rough, sneering types, reeking of whiskey and empty pride. His coat hung open, and a pistol sat on his hip, loose and loud. Elias Hart, Thomas called. Come out. I've come to collect what's mine. Mara stepped beside Elias. She isn't yours, Elias said. Thomas smiled thin. You think you can keep her? Think you can raise a bastard that ain't yours? That's what this is now. Elias raised the rifle slightly. What it is not your concern. I gave her shelter, Thomas shouted. Fed her. Took her in. She owes me. You gave her nothing, Mara said, her voice clear and calm. You left me cold, and I'm done being afraid of men who can't carry what they start. Thomas's face twisted. You'll regret this. I already regretted you, she said. The men behind Thomas shifted. One muttered something. Thomas didn't hear, or didn't care. He reached for his pistol. Elias didn't flinch, didn't blink, just lifted the rifle slowly and held it steady. You want to leave a scar, he said. You better aim well, because I don't miss. Thomas stared. Rage flickered. But there was something else now, something small and sour. Doubt. He hesitated, then spat in the snow. This ain't over. He turned, mounted, and rode off, not like a victor, but like a man who'd lost something he never had the right to claim. The others followed, silent. Mara exhaled. Her knees buckled slightly. Elias caught her arm. I'm fine, she said. Just tired. You're safe, he said, guiding her back inside. She didn't answer, just sat by the fire and let her breath steady. Elias set the rifle down, sat beside her. Outside, the snow began again, soft and clean. Inside, she leaned her head to his shoulder. It wasn't over. Not yet. But she wasn't alone anymore. The storm broke at dawn. It wasn't rain or thunder. It was pain, real, deep, and anchoring. Mara woke to it twisting low in her belly, raw and steady like the ground was calling something out of her. She didn't cry out. She'd done that once long ago in the dark of her old life. This time she simply breathed, sharp and sure, and braced her hands against the wall of the cabin. Elias stirred from his chair near the hearth. He was up before her next breath, one hand at her back, the other brushing sleep from his eyes. It's time, he asked. She gave a nod, jaw clenched. Sweat had already broken across her brow. They had no midwife. Emma was too far, the town too distant for that kind of help to reach in time. But Elias didn't falter. He moved like a man trained not by books, but by instinct, boiling water, spreading clean linen, lighting lamps against the gray blue of morning. The air inside the cabin grew thick with heat and quiet tension, like something holy was about to break loose. Mara labored through the rising light, silent for the most part, her body bending like a willow under weight and purpose. She gripped Elias's hand when the pain came sharp. He never pulled away, not once. He sat at her side, eyes locked on hers, murmuring steady things, not instructions, not platitudes. Just presence. I'm here. You're strong. She's almost here. Each word grounded her. Each breath she took felt borrowed from him. When the final moment came, it roared through her. She cried out, one long low sound that filled the cabin and then fell into silence. The silence broke with a new sound, small and fierce, wet and wild. The baby. Elias caught her in his hands, wrapped her fast in the blanket they'd folded together the week before. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from awe. Mara reached, barely able to lift her arms. Let me see her. And there she was, a girl, pink and blinking, fists balled up like she was already ready to fight for her place in the world. Mara wept then, not for pain, for relief, for grace, for the miracle of still being here. She's here, Elias said, his voice low and reverent. She's whole, Mara whispered. We're whole. He helped her settle the child against her chest, then moved to clean, to wash, to make order out of the sacred mess they conjured. Outside, the snow had stopped. The air was clear, the trees rimmed in silver light, and the world held its breath. They didn't speak much in the hours after. Elias kept the fire warm. Mara dozed, waking only to feed the girl or shift her aching body beneath the blankets. She never had to ask for anything. Elias knew. He always knew. And then, late into the night, when the wind began to whisper again and the lamps had burned low, came the knock. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 soft raps at the door, like a stone dropped in water. Elias rose, rifle in hand. He stepped to the window, peered through the frost-slicked glass. Mara sat up slowly, the baby stirring against her chest. It's him, Elias said. He didn't need to say the name. She knew. Don't go out there, she said. He turned, gaze calm. I won't. Not unless he steps in. Another knock. Then a voice, slurred and bitter. You think you can shut me out forever? Thomas. Mara swallowed. Her heart was pounding now, but her hands remained steady on the baby. You're not welcome here, Elias said through the door. I ain't come for a fight, Thomas lied. Just want to see her. She's not yours. I fed her once. You think that don't count for nothing. You left her cold. Elias didn't shout. He didn't threaten. His voice was like iron cooled in water. You don't get to write your name on someone just because you started their sentence. Silence. Then came the scrape, the soft whisper of steel drawn from leather. Mara rose to her feet. Let me speak to him, she said. Elias turned. No. I need to. There was something in her voice, not pride, not bravery. Something older. The knowing of a woman who had finally stopped shrinking. Elias hesitated. Then nodded once. She walked to the door, opened it slowly. Elias stood close behind her, rifle raised. Thomas stood just beyond the porch steps, snow caked on his boots, his hair wild, eyes red-rimmed. He looked at her, at the baby in her arms, at the cabin behind her. You don't even know what you're doing, he said. I know exactly what I'm doing, Mara replied. I'm choosing. You were mine. No, she said, voice low. I was lonely, and you used that. But I was never yours. He stepped closer. Elias chambered around. Thomas froze. You want to prove you're still the man you pretend to be? Mara said, her eyes steady. Then leave. Walk away. Don't come back. She'll never know me. She'll never miss you. He stared at her. There was something there. Not love, not even regret. Just the hollow ache of a man who'd mistaken possession for meaning. He spat in the snow, turned, and walked. No threats, no promises. Just the slow, bitter retreat of a man who'd finally seen himself clearly. The door closed. The latch clicked. Inside, the fire still burned. Mara sank back into the chair, the baby cooing softly. Elias set the rifle aside and knelt in front of them. You all right? He asked. I am now. He didn't ask if she meant it. He just took her hand and held it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but this time it carried no warnings. Only peace. I don't know what comes next, she said after a while. You don't need to, he answered. Next can come when you're ready. She looked down at the baby, then at him. I think I'd like to stay. His smile came slow, sure. You're already here. Mara leaned back, closed her eyes, and exhaled the last of her fear. She had been left. She had been used. She had been discarded. But she had not been broken. And in the quiet breath of that small room, with the man who never asked for more than she offered, and the child who had chosen her from the inside out, she had begun again. Not rescued, not claimed, just seen, just loved, and finally, home.